Hello and welcome back to Unbiased Magic Reviews. Today I'm going to be doing a requested magic review by Mosconi. This is Timon Krause's Witch Hand Method and Philosophy. As a kicker, I'm also adding the worst 5 witch hand effects that exist. This was recommended to me by Rob Jacks, and so I'm adding this just as a kicker. I'm going to try to keep this brief because I have a lot to say about the book and those worst 5 effects, so I don't want this video to get to be too long overall. So the book was put out by MindFx, and as you probably realize by now, you can't get it from them because it's sold out. So you're going to have to buy it secondhand. And in fact, I've actually sold my copy a while ago. Luckily, I did take some notes so I could do this review from my notes and stuff. But it's a great book. It's about 120 pages, and in it, he does go over the method in detail, and then he also goes over the lessons that he's learned from performing Witch Hand for about 8 years. So he goes over his presentations and then variations of that and other ideas. So I'm going to just touch on the highlights from the book and try to answer questions you probably would have related to it as I go along. So the first chapter is obviously the method, and that's probably what you care most about. You're probably wondering, has it been done before? And the fact of the matter is that several other people actually have put out products that use the exact same method, believe it or not. So if you have Alex Ward's Grandpa's Coin, it uses the same method, although I will tell you that Alex Ward doesn't really teach you any specifics of the method. He just kind of tells it to you. Whereas here in this book, Timon Krause goes over painstaking details about the limitations of the method, about what you need to do, so that way you can get it up to almost 100% surefire for yourself. The method definitely is operator dependent, and so that is something there that you have to think about. There are no electronics involved. I should also mention that Sylvan VIP and his partner Maxime, I think the last name is Schacht, French magicians, they did put out a witch hand routine effect which was called The Secret, and that uses the exact same method as well. If you speak French, then probably that would be something you may want to take a look at, because I think it's only in French. So that is really pretty much the idea of the method. I would tell you guys, the method really is surefire. I've had some really good results with it, and so I think that it's definitely reliable. Now, the book only has a small section on the method because the meat of the book is really on the presentation and ideas of the witch hand plot in general. So the next chapter after that, it really goes into the 2 main presentations that he uses. One which is more like an influential presentation, which is what you saw on Penn & Teller's Fool Us, which was called You've Got No Choice. And that script is exactly the same from what you saw on the show on TV. And that type of presentation is very similar to Alex Ward's Grandpa's Coin, where you're actually influencing the person. And the kicker ending that you saw on the show, which uses a prediction, if you are like me, then I immediately recognized that when I saw it on Fool Us, and that is that's a totally different Mentalism product. So you would have to get that separately if you're interested in that. And that was put out by Mark Oberon. So if you're interested in that kicker ending, that's something totally different you're gonna have to pick up. Me personally, I rather use Mentalism Wallet or use just like an envelope, use like a double-sided envelope instead. I just prefer that myself personally. And then the other presentational script that he gives you is called the Lie Game. And basically that's like the truth teller liar type premise. And there's been so many routines that have been put out like that. Like Mark Elsden's Tequila Hustler, for instance, Manos Kartsakis' book that was called V. So there's a lot of those type of truth teller liar type routines out there just like that. So that's what that routine is. One thing that is interesting here though with Timon Krause's presentation is he gets the audience involved with the lie game, and it really is kind of interesting. The last phase, he just has the person mentally think about what their answer would be, and then he just tries to read their mind. So that's kind of an interesting way of presenting it, and I thought it was really good. So that's really the presentational scripts that he gives you. And then the next chapter after that, he goes into, it's actually called Writing a Performance Piece, and he actually talks about how he uses somebody to help him write a script, and then his whole process that he goes about to do it, where he plays around with ideas, he writes stuff down, then he rehearses it, tries it out, goes back and forth. So it is really nice to see the creative process at work. I thought that was really useful in the book. After that, there is another chapter that's just variations on the witch hand premise, and that is full of all kinds of good information. Just some highlights from that for you guys that you'd be interested in is that he does go into the idea of the person puts their hand with the coin in their pocket, and they either leave the coin in their pocket or they bring the hand out with the coin in it. So this was very similar to what I had mentioned before in my other review, where Dan White did this on the Jimmy Fallon show. Hand or pocket type of premise. I thought that was interesting. He goes into the idea of using more than one object, the idea of using more than one spectator. And if you are interested in the idea of hiding an object between multiple spectators, I would also refer you to check out Patrick Redford's routine called Sunrise, because that's really a great effect that does that very similarly. And here, Timon Krause has a totally different way of doing it, but yet still his method is totally different, but still very workable. And then there's another really good variation that I really like a lot, which he calls synchronicity, which is the idea that your spectator has a coin and you have a coin, and then each of you bring your hands out and you've managed to mirror them each time. And again, it's very similar that you do 4 rounds. Each round, it just seems more and more impossible that somehow you can emulate your spectator each time. And the strongest part about it is that your spectators are going to remember that you brought your hand out before them. That's what they're going to remember. So it's really, really strong, even though not each phase you don't do that, but there's a bunch of convincers in there, which just are totally amazing. Now, another magician who put out something similar to that, a similar type idea that you bring your hands out and then somehow the person knows which hand it's in and they're always right, was Joel Dickinson. And that effect was called Foreseen. But instead of using 2 coins, he's actually a prediction. He actually makes a prediction, and then you bring your hand out, and then they manage to predict whether where the coin is. So something you may want to take a look at if you like that type of idea. And then finally, the other thing I thought was really good with that variations chapter was he talks about how you can use the witch hand effect to do a character read, where you give the person the coin, you have them put it in one hand, you don't even know where it starts, but you start asking them questions and you tell them, if you like red, keep it in that hand. If you like black, switch. If you like this, keep it. If you don't, switch. And it goes back and forth. And then finally they bring their hands out. You do a full character read. Well, I know it's in your right hand because I knew that you like the color red, that you rode a bicycle when you were a kid or whatever, and you go into those details. And this is very reminiscent to like the other brothers. They had an effect called hands down, where they asked questions and they had them change the coin back and forth. But in this version, you're actually doing a character read at the end. So very, very strong mentalism. And this is definitely something that I myself have thought about using, because it's like taking the witch hand effect to a whole nother level. I really like that a lot. Definitely really strong. That was a real highlight in the book for me. And then finally, the other last chapter that's really in there, he calls it mini Q&A. And in there, he shows you how you could take a coin and write yes or no on one side. On one side you write yes, and the other side you write no. And then you ask the person, you have them ask a question, you flip the coin in the air, and then, basically you're going to be able to tell them if it's yes or no before you open your hand. And this I did not find that useful because it uses like a controlled coin toss. I really didn't like that very much. That's probably the one thing in the book I didn't like at all. The rest of the book I thought was really good. In terms of negative things that you may be interested in, the witch hand method does have a limitation, a restriction, which is that the person has to be standing. The method is not reliable if the person is sitting down. So that's the big restriction. In terms of the book overall, it's very well written. I would say the biggest negative aspect of the book in general may be just that last chapter, that mini Q&A. I really didn't like it. Other than that, I thought the rest of the book was really informative, especially the chapter on just how to write a performance piece. I thought it was really good. The scripts that he gives you are excellent if you want to use them, although you probably should just come up with your own script. And overall, I think that this is definitely the definitive method of which hand, that after you learn this method and you learn these presentations, you probably are not going to go back to any other types of methods out there. So that's pretty much everything I have to tell you about the book in general. If you have any other questions about it, just let me know. Now, in terms of the 5 worst which hand effects, I'm going to just kind of run through these, but I'm going to mention them and just give you an idea, my ideas of why I think they're really bad. And the majority of these, the main reason is really the method and not so much the presentation. And I'm going to tell you guys why this is. So starting from number 5, so this goes from least to most, so it goes from less to most worst effect, which hand effect. So number 5 was put out by Brian Reynolds, and this you can find in the Safwan papers. It was called BOHT. So this was a one-phase which hand effect that really depended on a huge bluff. It was like a 50-50 bluff. And so I didn't really think it was good at all. I think you should probably steer far away from it. And that's number 5 on the 5th worst which hand effect. Number 4 goes to Rick Lax. Quarterly report. And in this effect, a spectator takes a quarter and puts it behind their back. You tell them that you already know which hand it's going to be in, and you know with such certainty that you're going to put $100 on it. And basically, the biggest issue that I had with this was it uses like a multiple out to try to justify how you know which hand the quarter's in. It's absolutely horrible. It's terrible. And I definitely would not recommend it to you. I didn't like it at all, and it's only one phase routine. He tells you that you should follow it up with some other which hand routine. So I think it's extremely weak, and it's worse than your average magician's choice, is what I think about that effect. So it's really not good. So number 3 on the list goes to Luca Volpe with his effect, Stone of Destiny. Now, this effect uses 2 objects, and the person mixes them up in their hands behind their back. They bring one hand forward, and you ask them to name the 2 objects, and then you tell them which one is behind their back and which one is in front of them, okay? Now, the reason why I think that this is total rubbish is because he tells you that the person is going to have the one object in one place a certain percent of the time. It's just totally ridiculous. So it's just based on his own observations of what people normally do. And so why would you put out an entire effect just based on a simple assumption from his own observations? I mean, it's just crazy. So definitely that is not reliable, and I would never recommend that to anyone. That's why it's got the number 3 position. Now the number 2 position, second worst which hand effect that you can find out there goes to Pablo Amira. Poor Pablo. His effect, micro expression which hand, okay? Now this is another which hand effect that relies on a simple gambit. You have the spectator hide something, hide a coin in one of their hands. They bring their hands forward, and you begin the gambit by saying, okay, I think the right hand, and then you kind of watch them to see how they're going to react before you finish your sentence, which just really, can you really imagine that somebody would actually put out like a whole ebook based on that simple like gamble? I mean, that's crazy. Isn't that nuts? It goes to show you that some people just are trying so hard to make money from you that they'll do whatever they can to do that. So the moral of the story here is steer clear of this product, which is called Micro Expression Witch Hand. And then finally, the number one worst witch hand effect that you should absolutely never, ever, ever pick up goes to Brandon Queen and his effect Oculus. Okay, I have to admit to you guys, this is the worst product that I purchased this last year. This is the absolute worst product ever, probably of all time that I ever purchased, but definitely of last year. And this, unfortunately, the whole premise of this is that this uses a physiological reaction to be able to tell you which hand a person is holding a coin or an object. And it's absolutely terrible. It doesn't work. It's not reliable. And here's the part that made me laugh was when I actually watched the total uncut performances that he provides on the instructional video. He screws up a bunch of times. And he still left it in the video. He didn't even edit it out. So he's performing for people and he's screwing up. It's kind of funny because I think you probably would get the same amount of positive, like the same amount of hits as negatives if you just guessed, which is really funny because that's pretty much what this is. It's just guessing. So that's the absolute worst witch hand effect. Oculus by Brandon Queen. Steer clear of that totally. In fact, steer clear of all 5 of these. So that's my list and that's my review for today. If you guys have any questions about any of this, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, smash that like button and that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys on the next review.